recording as well. He says something really quick. Let's see if I can, if I see it.
Yeah. Is it working?
Hmm.
Okay. No?
Uh,
Is it just because I'm staying too far away from my mic, or was
no,
it
I'm
just?
not. I'm not seeing the.
Mm.
I'm not seeing it going live. Oh yeah, now it's live. Now it's live.
Okay.
All right. Um. So, we left off yesterday, right? Talking about Gatto's book.
You mean last week?
Or last week. Last time. Yesterday.
We don't gotta
Last
we
time.
don't gotta pretend we do this every day.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's true. No, we left off last time talking about Dumbing Us Down by John Taylor Gatto. Um, and is there any recap that you want to do about that?
Um, Not off the top of my head now.
Okay. Um, I guess the main gist that I got from the book um, is the ruination and like networking destruction of community basically is what I felt we covered in that one, and you wanted to talk about the lessons that were taught by school teachers in the schooling that it was his goal basically, right?
Yeah. So the first and maybe the most hard hitting of the essays goes over the seven things that he feels that he teaches in schools, and this is someone who's not trying to do a poor job. He's won multiple awards, multiple Teacher of the Year awards, and after all that and his experience as a teacher, this is sort of his takeaway. And so the first one, and I think possibly the most important one because it's the foundation for everything else. He says the first thing that he teaches is confusion, because the things that are being taught are not necessarily connected to each other in any way, shape, or form. There are certain things that are for sure. History, you tend to go through it in a linear fashion, and like mathematics, you kind of have to know the foundations before you can learn anything else. But after a certain point, pretty much everything becomes very scattershot, and there's not really any reason for you learning one particular thing over another. It's just we're gonna hop from geology to the solar system to biology to who knows what, and we'll skip over things that might be more relevant to you and just teach you something that's effectively like it's not necessarily useless. It just might be useless to you and what you're doing in your life.
Right. Yeah. I can see that. It's not that.
Geology to the solar system.
Yeah, it's not that. I actually unmuted the thing there. The It's not that it's necessarily useless to know. It's just not useful for you.
Well, and more importantly though, there's no coherence to it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah,
You're not you're
yeah,
not information.
he talked about like basically moving from subject to subject. Like
Yeah,
you spend an hour learning about physics, and then you're immediately put in for another hour learning about I don't know of mice and men.
and well, not just that, but even within the same subject, there's not really any coherence to it, right? You're not again, like with the science example, you're not moving from subject to subject progressively necessarily, right? Especially in elementary school,
Mm-hmm.
you're just jumping between random topics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like you'll go from geology to biology to um I don't know, botany, like just randomly.
Yeah, and so there's no categorical pattern, right? Oh, these are all things that I need to know, which there at one point was actually the case. I think even in public schools, where say your math questions would be, uh, calculating the number of like barrels that you could send from A to B, or bushels of hay or something like that, right?
Hmm.
Things that were in real concrete terms people could think about, and now all those things are abstractions, right? Just take 87 and then multiply it by 42 or something, or you'll get a word problem, but it'll be some situation that like has no.
Jack has 130 apples.
Well, not even just
And
that. It's like okay, how many how many people even touch a train anymore? And yet every single question about mathematics and time is about trains passing each other on a track in some distant land over some absurd uh, distance as well. Um, it's not being put in a context that the students are necessarily part of.
Right.
Whereas, like, if you grow up on a farm and your questions are questions about farm life, you're like, oh, I intuitively feel already like I'm at home with these questions.
Right.
Um, and then yeah, so there's no relevance there. There's no relevance necessarily from one topic to the next. You're
Well,
just being taught various.
actually, a really relevant question for modern kids would be like, you need to start work by 9 a.m. You live 45 minutes away from your work,
Hmm.
or you live 4 miles from work,
Yeah,
right? And you're going to travel at just over 2 miles per hour to get to work, right?
yeah,
Or a net of like 5 miles an hour to get to work, and it's going to take you 20 minutes to prepare. Or it's going to take this amount of time for brush your teeth, this amount of
yeah.
time, whatever. What time do you need to get up in the morning prior to getting to work for you to get to work on time?
Or even just something as simple as like, it's interesting because I think it was grade 10 or something like that. They suddenly went back into um, multiplication, division, and addition because it was all budgeting stuff. And it's like, well, why weren't any of the earlier like a little kid's not necessarily going to be handling a lot of money, but they'll still understand like if you have to buy a toy or a candy or something like that, and it costs this much plus tax, you have to be able to calculate that, right? And there's a motive there.
Yeah.
Um, but for things that aren't quite so clear cut as math, where it's like you kind of have the answer, you don't. Like the amount of time spent on the solar system, which to be fair, like I would have been interested in at that point, and many other kids would have been, and so that's nice. But for anyone who isn't, like what relevance does it have at this point? What the order of the planets in the solar system is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, none at all.
Or I know some people had to learn constellations, which like if you're big on stargazing or possibly navigation, you know,
Useful.
roughing it in the woods, certainly useful. Other than that, uh, kind of worthless. Like I'm not saying that it's not a good skill to learn, but in terms of actual practicality, it's fairly low on the list.
Um, yeah, for sure. But again, it goes back to the original, like to the point that he was making. I think, to me, was that education should come from communities. Like you have people in your life that are much better at educating you than a teacher, and
Well,
the ability, the fact that they are certified to teach does not really mean anything in their ability to actually educate someone.
it's also the fact that the best students are students who are eager to learn the thing in question,
Mm-hmm.
right? So when you strap someone down for however many hours a day, and you're like, you're going to learn this, and then this, and then this, and then this, you are presenting learning as a chore that they have to do,
Mm-hmm.
and not as something that they should pursue because they're interested in it.
Yeah.
And I've run into countless people who have no desire to learn anything for the rest of their lives because it's just been drilled into them that learning sucks and is boring and is the most unpleasant thing that they could possibly do because that's all they've had to do for 8 hours a day for the better part of a year for 12 years.
And the other thing too that he mentions in the books, talking about um, the the ability that not ability that the fact that people are being paid to teach students is fundamentally wrong. Like
Yeah,
a
well,
person should not be paid to teach someone.
I think we touched on that a little bit last time with the uh, when he talks about the sophists and
Yeah, yeah,
and how
but
the
but it
philosophers of the time despised them.
yeah, but it also comes in play here is the bureaucracy part, right? So
Oh, for sure.
you when you're being paid to do something, oh, one second. There you go. When you're being paid to do something, you your first instinct for for any work like that is to defend your own job, right?
Yeah,
So, which we did go over, but not only that, but the fact of the matter is, like, when you're paid to teach a thing and you're teaching to a curriculum, like, that thing is not the thing that necessarily needs to be taught to the student. Like, you're
yeah,
not actually doing anything in the student's favor when you are doing that, because they're not going to learn, or they're not going to have a good experience at the very least, or really devote themselves to the education, because
yeah,
it's not like it's not a mutual exchange.
for sure.
And that's generally what education that's what like classical educations were, right?
Yeah. Um, well, and then like moving on to the next two, which you're already kind of touching on a little bit with some of the points that you're making, a class position and indifference, right? Which are effectively uh, about people taking orders and switching between classes at at sort of an arbitrary point in time. It's not, you finished your lesson, let's move on to a new subject. We've run out of time. It's time for you to go to your next class full of things that aren't attached to each other in any way, shape, or form, and certainly aren't attached to anything that you were just learning.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so and I I don't know that I necessarily agree that that's a main contributing factor to attention span problems, because there's a number of other things that are going on there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I don't know that we had necessarily a decline in attention span, even at the beginning of public schooling.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it certainly helps reinforce what's already there. Um, but
Well,
yeah,
I think the point that he was making in that is that there is no completion or follow through with the task, right?
sure,
Like, the task being completed is less important than going to the next location.
sure. I think he does make a point at some juncture in the book about that contributing to attention span issues,
Mm-hmm.
though, and so I just wanted to address that. Like, I'm not sure about that one. I'm not saying it's definitely not the case. It's entirely possible. But I haven't seen anything that like really convinces me that that's true.
Well,
Um,
I think the other part of it that is a contributing factor, and I think this is part of the thing that he said is the fact that a person um, is given no time alone. Like, there is no solitude and alone time to actually think about things.
oh, sure, but that's yeah, we'll get to that.
Right, right.
Um,
But I think that was a big part of that attention span thing as well.
um, so yeah, I mean, it's really, I don't even think it's controversial to say that schools are quite regimented in terms of how they're structured,
Mm-hmm.
especially as you get into the later years and you're now going to separate teachers for separate classes and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
Um,
what you mentioned in the secondary
yeah,
classing setting.
yeah. I have no idea how like middle school works in the States, because I went to, it was like a combined middle school, high school kind of high school. So from grade 8 to 12, it was just all high school.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um,
So we have two different schooling forms in the U.S. So there's middle school, and then there's also junior high, and then there's high school. So, like,
mm,
in middle school, it is sixth through eighth, right?
mm,
And with junior high, it's uh, ninth, uh, or eighth and ninth is junior high.
Okay.
So it depends on where you are in the country, but like that age distinction doesn't really matter.
It's not so much about the age distinction as I don't know if there's a different structure from say middle school to high school. Because
Yeah,
here it's all the same structure.
yeah, but I'm saying that I don't know that that really matters as much because
Well,
the thing is you're still like going through the same
yeah, I'm
process.
not saying that you don't. I'm saying I don't like. So if we're talking about what we're including in what category of school, because you were talking about secondary school, right? I
Mm.
don't know where you guys are placing any of these, because
Oh,
I
gotcha,
just had two, so it's very clear cut here, right? You're
gotcha.
either in elementary school or you're in high school, and this is the structure for one, and this is the structure for the other.
So,
Um,
primary education
yep.
is generally considered like before moving out of elementary school. So
Okay. Interesting.
fifth or sixth grade, fifth or seventh grade, is primary school, and then once you go to um, junior high or high school, that's secondary.
Okay.
So
Um,
yeah.
yeah. So I think because what I will say is when you have a singular teacher, they've got more flexibility, if not in practice, then at least in theory, because not everybody takes advantage of it.
Yeah.
But they've got more flexibility to actually make connections between lessons.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when you've got and there's something to be said for specialists for sure. But when you've got a team of specialists and they're not really communicating with each other because they've each got their own list of students and they might not really line up with they might have say 14 people from one teacher and 14 from another and two who have neither teacher because they're not even taking that subject, right? You can't really there's no way to connect lessons together. So even if you were trying to go, well, you learned about this in this book, now this is the concept actually played out, there's no opportunity for that.
Mm-hmm.
So the disconnect continues.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you have the aspect of, the constant shifting in subjects, the constant moving around, following the clock. It really does, when you think about it in those terms, uh, you know, bring to mind the factory worker goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like totally makes sense from that perspective, but the the main thing that I took from schooling is like this is a personal anecdote
Sure.
is that questioning anyone in authority over me is going to result in me being punished.
Interesting.
Like that was the main lesson that I was taught in middle school is that confronting or like doing anything in like questioning anyone in an authority figure from public facing was going to result in me being punished.
So what I learned was that it's very easy to manipulate the system,
Uh-huh.
and I mean both in the sense that like, so I guess this sort of fits in with what you're talking about, but in a way that I think relates to some current issues a little bit. The main thing that I learned was that there is a type of rebellion against the system that is encouraged,
Mm-hmm.
because it doesn't fall outside of the parameters.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, the one that I always tell people if I run into anybody who's going through high school still, which happens very occasionally at this point, but if I do run into somebody of that age, I tell them if you're writing an essay and you're given an A or B option, this isn't for exams, right? You can't do this for any kind of state or provincial thing. You can't do this for any final exam because it's not your teacher marking it necessarily, right? It's risky to do it there. But if you're just doing an essay for your actual class, for the teachers that you see every day, and they give you an A or B option, you pick a C option that says that both of those are wrong. and every time you'll get better marks.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's an obvious answer. It's not so far out of the woods that they would go like, okay, you just didn't do the assignment, and they appreciate it. I think both because they probably get bored reading the same essay over and over, like one of two essays, right? But also, I think there's an aspect with the sort of artsier subjects where I think they also want to break out of the system a little bit, and so there's a little bit of flexibility there. But you can't break out of the system to the point where you would actually do any damage to it or change it in any significant way, right? It's superficial, and in that respect, I think we're seeing that kind of play out now, where there's a number of people who are, let's say, in various protests that seem to have a considerable amount of media and political backing, and there's no reflection on this. And I think if they reflected on it, they would realize they're just writing the C answer on their essay instead of refusing to write the essay outright.
Mm. Yeah, I can see that.
Um, yeah. Anything else to say on the scheduling aspect?
Not really. I mean, realistically, like the main thrust of the sorry, where would I put it? The main thrust of what he was trying to get across to me, like I agreed with, right? But I don't know. I don't know that there's a way to really, I don't know, move forward in it, right? Like, so like the thing that is being said is that schooling is bad, right?
Well, yeah, the structure of the school system
Yeah,
is
is
bad. It
bad,
doesn't get the job done.
right? Well, I don't even think it's that. I think that the thing that he is really trying to convey is that like public education is fundamentally wrong for human society. Like,
Well, okay, that would also depend on what you mean when you say public education, because a community getting together and managing a collectivized education system for people that they know is also public education, is it not?
in a way, but it's not really them. So it's not really them. Um, so all right. So like when he was talking about his upbringing on the Green Men Talking, right? The reason that
Sure.
resonated so much with me, um, is because of my what I consider my actual education when I was up in like a farm in a rural area,
Yeah.
and it was like there was education there, right?
Hmm.
But it wasn't really formalized anyway. It was like if you went up and said, "Hey, I don't know how to do that," like the people would be like, "Yeah, I don't have time right now, but I'd be happy to show you," like that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Or they'd be like, "Yeah, here, come here, I'll talk to you about it."
Um,
Like that is the sort of education that I'm talking about, like within a community. I think is what he was trying to say.
sure, but that like it I don't want to play the semantic game here. It's really what it boils down to, right?
Yeah.
So like this I would say the structure of the current apparatus is the main problem. And part of the structure is that it has to be standardized across communities.
Mm-hmm.
But like if a community gets together and they decide on a method, really, and he goes over this later when he starts talking about the religious communities, right? The communities should be able to sort of rise and fall by virtue of their organization.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, if someone did decide that they want to go right back to the system, and maybe it works for the small number of people that they have there, because there are people who go through the public education system and they're happy to do it because they were always kind of going to turn out that way anyway. Um,
Yeah,
but
Democrats. No, I'm sorry. That's
but but oh, and on that note, I think the next 2 points, honestly, really get to the heart of that. Is the not necessarily Democrats, but emotional dependency and intellectual dependency. Um, those two are really basically the same problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where we get our NPC meme from, right? Is you've got a group of people who don't seem to believe anything unless it's shoved into a paper.
Mm-hmm.
And so their only response to you listing off things that have happened to real people is like source, which, you know, to an extent that's warranted because we now live in a world where almost nobody is trustworthy. No, nobody even seeks to be trustworthy anymore or establish any kind of credibility. They just hope that you, in the same way that they now demand that you respect people, they demand that you trust people. And by
Mm.
virtue of somebody's schooling or the people that they know, you're expected to put your faith in them, even for things that would be dire if you were to if they were to be wrong.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that to me is just an extension of the relationship between public school teachers and students.
Is there? I mean, they're basically the form of the church telling you what is the correct catechism.
Well, they're the elites, right?
Yeah.
Is to a child.
Yeah, the church was the elites before.
Yeah,
Same thing.
but it's not exclusive to the church. Is my point.
Well, no, but the church was the elite.
Sure.
Like, and they were the ones that taught, that gave everyone a unified viewpoint to look at the world through and what is true.
The main issue right now is that there's no particular reason. So that the one advantage of the church,
Mm-hmm.
the one thing that or one of the primary things I'll give them is that if you've got a divine narrative behind
Mm-hmm.
you, then you've got something that's unerring, right? So even if you're actually wrong, right? There's got to be some reason it was a test or something like that, right? Because there's a foundation there that can't be shaken.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But once you abandon that, once people are left to fend for themselves, the average person doesn't form anything unshakable. They form things that are very easy to topple, and so they'll flee to the nearest authority figure.
Yeah, but authority being good, the authority figures being in your corner is an unshakable truth that is taught in schooling.
Um, they attempt to do that for sure, but that only makes it so the difference between God being in your corner and the president being in your corner is that God doesn't make mistakes.
Hmm. True, but the advantage of it being a mortal man as opposed to God is that when mistakes do happen, it's like, well, we can just replace that guy. And but
But that's
government,
but
but government and and police institutions and governmental institutions, just like schooling institutions, are always for or in your best interest, which is what the argument for schooling is that we must have schools because they're better than nothing.
so the issue again though is that like you need something more solid as a foundation than that, right? Like the again, like I'm not going to sit here and go like everybody needs to convert to Christianity. That's obviously not going to be my position. Um,
Right.
but there's certain advantages that I've noticed that like the I even now hesitate to say the secular groups because they've been anything but the secular groups have not built up to replace. Uh, there's a level of community and there's a level of solid foundation that has not been constructed outside of religion.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so because all of your idols are fallible and have to be thrown away, there's no sense of permanence with any of them, right? And
Right,
so
but
now you've got this.
the right, but the government itself is the god. Like,
Yes and no. like people assume that there needs to be one in some way, shape, or form, but they'll be heavily divided, more so than any religious schism, on how it should be divided.
Well, yeah,
And
that's
that's because
just
there's no actual
that's
scripture.
right. That being true, like I can accept that being true. I'm just saying the institution itself, the fact that the institution exists, is in itself a proof that it is good. Like that is like a religious belief. Like if
I
you
think it's more. I think for that part, it's more that people assume it's odd, right? People assume that because a thing is, then it couldn't have been another way. I don't know that that's necessarily ascribing good to it, because if you ask those people, you know, well, is the school system run well? They'll all say no. Like very few people will say yes,
mhm.
and they'll talk about the rot all the way down and the number of administrators, and they'll go
They'll
through the
do the
whole nine
same
yards.
thing. They'll do the same thing about the universal healthcare in Canada.
Oh, they absolutely do.
Yeah, and
Actually, it's worse. It's worse for the universal healthcare in Canada because there aren't really many independent studies on it, and the
mm,
few that are there are done by institutes that are obviously going to be more critical of it, so they can be dismissed out of hand.
yeah,
Is the average thinking,
yep.
and so it's actually worse than it is for the school system, insofar as like you could give someone all the evidence in the world that it is a bad system, and they would still defend it.
I don't know. I think people who've gone through the schooling system defend it. Like people who've experienced the like blatant blatant indifference and kind of just terrible experiences of being essentially sent to like a prison for what feels like one, anyways, for some insane amount of time for 12 years of your life is accepted and viewed as, well, we just need to pump more money into it. We need to make it better. We need to, like, whatever.
Sure.
Like
Yeah,
that.
I think there's definitely a false idea of, and this is actually the one thing that I have noticed since I've read this book and started to talk to people about it, because I had brought up some of these ideas before, um, but I was less I wasn't quite as convinced before, as to just how bad it was,
Mhm.
effectively, right?
Yeah.
And then here comes this guy who's a teacher who's been working within the system, who's like, no, all those things that you suspect are true are true.
Yeah, no,
Um,
no. You like when you told me about this book, I was like, oh yeah, sure, I'll give it a read. And when I actually listened to the book, because I listened to it, didn't read
yeah.
it, but when I actually got through the book, like one of the things was, like just part of my head is like, I've had this conversation with him before, and he was very skeptical of my position about how bad these schools are.
Yeah.
I remember
So
I remember talking to you about this too, and it was just amusing. Anyways, so I found it very interesting that you want to talk about this after reading that. I wanted to know your position on it, and I'm glad you've seen the light that schools are actually
well,
really trash.
so I've been of the opinion for a long time now that like homeschooling's the way to go.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But it was just like, okay, so what do we do for the people who can't make that work? And actually, since then, it's been sort of like, well, it's actually really hard to not make that work. The only real problem is everybody being stuck in this like very like urban mindset where it's like we got to consolidate and we got to live in the places where the land is more expensive, and we got to do X, Y, and Z that like make things pricier and less habitable.
Mm,
Because really, it's not, it shouldn't be a money issue, because we're the richest civilization in human history.
yeah,
Things that kings could not have dreamed to own,
are
you know,
commonplace.
well, they're so common that they're free.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, it has never been easier to survive as a human being than right now,
Yeah,
and so
no,
it's like
I like
the idea then,
if I quit my job and I go out into the streets and I become a beggar, I'll be fine.
yeah. And
Like,
so the idea then that like we don't have the resources to take care of children seems absurd to me
Uh-huh.
because, like, okay, so if you're however many generations removed, ancestor. I mean, even just let's focus on the New World, right? Not that long ago, our predecessors, our ancestors, were cutting down trees to build log houses,
Mm-hmm.
and they were hunting and fishing on the same lands where there are cities built now,
Mm-hmm.
and and uh, and they were doing just fine, right? They were raising their children. There were schools sometimes, but it was rare. And most of the stuff you had to learn from your parents or from someone else who
Well,
lived
but
nearby.
the other thing too is like women would learn from their mothers
Yeah,
because they would help their mothers do the things that mothers did, and
for sure.
sons would learn from their fathers because sons would go out and work and help their father do the things that their father did. Like that was their education. Their education was, if your dad was a blacksmith, your education was going to the blacksmith and holding steel for your dad to hit, to shape
Yeah,
into parts. You know, if your mom was a seamstress, your education was helping your mom like make clothing. Like that was your education. It
yeah.
wasn't. It's this. It's this. What it is this idea is like, oh, the women like doing things or having like work or like whatever, like them being basically like trophies. Like this idea that women are
Mm,
trophies.
yeah,
Um, is like really the thing that has really upset things. Like women maybe didn't earn as much money as men, and that's true. They didn't. And that's just the way the world is. But they didn't earn as much money because the things that they were doing were valuable to the family, not to the
yeah.
society.
Well,
And
by extension, those things are valuable to the society.
yeah. But what I mean by valuable is like monetarily, there was no value, like there was no like immediate transferable good that was being
Yeah, well,
produced.
that's what I mean. Is it's not direct.
Right, and it still is and was extremely valuable,
Yeah,
and the idea that what women did is somehow not valuable, I think is an invention of like the 20th century.
oh, it absolutely is. And I would say as well. I think if you were to consider, if you were to try to put a price on it, I think one you could probably a lot easier than you might think.
Mm-hmm.
When you consider, education and the time not spent doing these other tasks, stuff like that, right? The money saved per household. I mean, it was a different philosophy then. So definitely your GDP isn't going up because people aren't consuming to the extent that they are now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think your household wealth probably not looking too bad
Yeah,
compared
I
to
think
now.
your household wealth is probably better.
Yeah.
Like
Um,
the amount of money that you are earning um for for the family is probably much better with uh with a single income because of the savings on education and housing and like all that stuff. I mean, housing is about the same, but you get what I mean. Like the
well,
savings
yeah,
that you get from having a person whose goal is to make for betterment of the family is better for the family.
yeah. Well, and it then is passed on to the children who have a better starting point
Mm-hmm.
to grow from.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
and now, the other side of this, right, is now we have all of the information that
Mm-hmm.
we need available at any time for free.
Yes.
And that was never a thing throughout human history. So not only is it easier to survive than any point in human history, not only do we have more time because of the number of things that we have that are cheap that make jobs easier and more convenient, but we also have all of the information that we could possibly want to teach someone available 24/7 as long as you have electricity and an internet connection.
But you aren't certified to be a teacher. I mean, how could you possibly educate your child?
Well, as an example, and I know if we can get Robin here, we'll get more homeschool stories. But I did end up getting homeschooled very briefly between schools for about like a month or two.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and my mom wasn't sure what to do, so she went out to a bookstore and she picked up some workbooks that were marked for the ages that for the age that I was, and she would take out a page from the book every day, and I would work through that, and I was ahead of my class.
Hmm.
I did less schooling in a month than my peers did. I was ahead of the class, and all I did was work out of a like probably like a $5 $10 workbook.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's not even getting into like the internet has so many resources, right? You've got interactive learning, you've got uh, audio, you've got video, you've got text. I do think that probably the best way to do it is to do something on paper rather than to have a kid sit in front of a screen.
Oh yeah, for sure,
But
definitely.
you can still look that stuff up yourself, prepare it, and then present it to them. And that really shouldn't take you that much time. I guess when you get more into high school, then you're like relearning some of this stuff and then trying to teach it to them. And at that point, you could consider getting a tutor. And I know there's instances where people go and grab like a tutor for multiple students. So they'll do like a learning pod. So it'll be one teacher for say 5 students, which is already a way better ratio than you get in a public school.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's just for a very specific subject, right? And it's like, okay, well, everybody wants to learn this one thing, so this is what we're gonna learn. Um,
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I think one of the things like for basic education, I think I'd be perfectly fine like teaching my kid like basic math and
sure.
basic writing, basic reading, stuff like that. And if it's a subject that I understand, like computers, right, and computer
Yep.
security, like I understand that very well, and if they were interested in doing that, I could teach them very easily. And then uh, my wife, like whatever job that she trained for, whatever,
Yeah.
if that child wanted to do that, like then like those, there are two experts right there, like in the
Sure.
household, like whatever they do. Um, the other one though, if you wanted, if I had a kid that was like, oh, I really like cars, let's say, right?
Yeah.
Then I just go. I was like, oh, well, we can find you a mechanic to be a mentor for you,
Yeah.
right?
That's what
And
I mean. It's like if they're like, well, I'm gonna be out of work for X number of hours, and you're like, okay, well, I'll pay you to do this to compensate, right? You
mhm.
can also split that cost between other parents in the community that also are looking for that service.
Yeah, I can see that, but I'm saying finding a mentor, uh, like more like you, but like I know mechanics, right?
Sure.
Like it was like, hey, like my kid kind of is interested in mechanics. Like, are you like, would you teach them how to turn wrenches, right? Like they'd be
Yeah.
like, yeah, cool. Like yeah, they can like watch them doing and stuff like that. Or and like some other person might want me to teach their kid about computers because they're really interested in that too, right?
Yeah.
That sort of thing. But like the idea that the relationship between the mentor and the mentee should be a interpersonal one, right? Like
For sure.
part of the education should be like an interpersonal relationship between you and the other person, I think.
Yeah. I definitely think so. I'm just saying like there will be instances where like you know something is complicated enough that someone's really got to step aside and go, okay, here's how this whole ordeal works.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Well, yeah, no, I agree with that. I'm just saying that I think if because we're so dependent on the schooling system, we think that that system has to be done um, by like like a professional or whatever.
oh, sure. Yeah, I'm not saying that at all. My thought behind the tutor thing was just that would just be basically anybody who is specialized in a subject that you're not. They don't have
Gotcha.
to be trained specifically to be a teacher.
No, I'm not even talking about training specifically to be a teacher. So like,
Okay.
um, so when you are trying to teach someone what, I don't know, like when I worked with my uncle up on his farm, right? Like he
Mhm.
had to do all sorts of stuff, and like he taught me a whole spectrum of different things,
Sure.
um, by working with him and doing those things, right?
Yeah.
Where and part of that was like doing mechanics work and stuff, right? And so like you live with a person, or you like have someone in your life
Mm.
that should be able to probably have a lot of the skills to
Yeah.
get you like good 60% of the way, right? Like you know how, like, what a carburetor is, you know what fuel injection is, you know what a bore, what a stroke is. Like you learn those things, right?
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh yeah, I really want to go further. And then that's like when you want to actually, like, that's what I want to do for a career, right? That would
Yeah.
be, in a classical sense, that would be where you would join a guild, right? And be like, yeah,
Yeah.
I want to apprentice, and because this is the job that I want.
I know that there was one instance. So effectively back in the day when people were still living in log cabins, and there was the opportunity to make your house out of bricks, right? There would be people who would go around to different communities, and the communities would pay them to teach them how to make bricks. So they could have just made bricks and sold them, right? But what they did instead was they got paid a little bit, and they taught everybody in town how to make bricks.
Mm-hmm.
And provided that you were good enough at it, then you wouldn't have to hire that person again. They just move on to the next town.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there will probably be instances like that in a situation where we
Mm-hmm.
eliminate
Yeah, for
public
sure.
schooling.
Especially for new things, right?
Yeah.
Like for the brick making example, right? Like that was a
Yeah.
new thing, so like teaching that thing, making it part of that community, so then that community could have it for future reference, basically.
Yeah.
The other thing too is that, like with computers, right? Like that would be an example of a new thing, and so you would need specialized people because they're just, it didn't exist before. So
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Um, but yeah, I think going back to the topic we've gone on a bit of a tangent from.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I, I would say actually point six also provisional self-esteem kind of fits into the two dependencies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, right, this idea that like you're evaluated and you should feel happy or sad based on this evaluation, based on how many of the factoids you can repeat.
How many gold stars you got?
Yeah, and well, and the gold stars are how obedient you are, right?
Mm-hmm.
The
Yeah.
teacher said something, you repeated it later, and you get kudos for that.
Right.
And the issue with that is that and we can see that this is an issue, right? Because we've now got a generation of people who have been so integrated into the system, that's been so sterilized down to the nth degree, that they don't know anything that's not in a textbook.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've met multiple people now who straight up know almost nothing about the world, because like I think we lucked out a little bit in that when we were growing up, the internet, at least for me, was a thing. It just wasn't as big a thing. It was
Mm-hmm.
like you could search for something and you might find it like 10 pages down. And so like, looking for stuff online was kind of frustrating, so it was more like just do it yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
looking in an encyclopedia and then finding a reference was a much faster way to find a lot of things.
yeah. And there wasn't this like there were opportunities to communicate online, but they were clunky.
Mm-hmm.
There weren't really many opportunities until at least later for me, to play games online. That wasn't really a thing until much later, and so uh, there's that portion where you're sent out into the world to kind of figure stuff out. My parents didn't sit outside and watch me play with my friends. They would be inside or they'd be at work, and I'd be, getting watched by my neighbor, but they still would be inside, doing chores or making dinner
I
or what
remember
have you.
my dad was I got shit to do. Don't come back until the lights come on.
Yeah,
Till the street
and
lights come
so
on. Get out of
there'd be
here.
like
Yeah.
yeah, there'd be like a boundary, like don't go beyond this point here, don't go beyond the speed bump or that house or that tree, right? And other than that, have at her.
Yeah,
And so
don't
there's an
don't cross
aspect.
the railroad tracks, which we always did.
Yeah.
We always crossed the railroad tracks. Like,
Oh yeah, and
what?
I was told, yeah, I was told not to go down to the creek, and I totally did. Uh, and there's nothing down there. My friend lied. He was like, "Yeah, there's something really cool down there." And there's nothing.
Just a
Um,
creek, yeah.
it was just a creek. Uh, Stuff like that, right?
Hmm.
And like, the reality of it was like that lack of structure was probably more important than any of the structured schooling that I did.
Yeah, because it gave you solitude and it gave you
Yeah,
independence and it gave you a bunch of stuff, right? Like,
yeah,
yeah, and there were many instances where I can like point to where one of the most important parts of growing up was being told, "All right, just go do it." Like,
yeah.
it's like, yeah, but how do I do it? I don't know. Fucking just a hole. Like, go dig. Fine. Just
Yeah.
you gotta go do it.
Well, it's like so I ran into someone. So there's two conversations that have stuck out to me. One is with someone that I know, like as an online friend kind of deal, and one is just like someone I ran into randomly in one of the various spaces that I, drift through.
Hmm.
And the latter was interesting because he insisted that like one of the advantages of public schools is the existence of sports teams. I'm like, well, okay, so even if we ignore the fact that you can just go and sign your kid up for a sports team in your area, and they're like never gonna say no. Um, there's also the fact that like you can just send your kid outside and they can play games with other people in the neighborhood.
Yeah,
To which you
I
went,
used to go outside and I'd play like baseball all the time.
yeah,
Like I would just go out
well,
with other kids and just play baseball.
yeah. I pointed out that I played street hockey with people who certainly weren't in any of my classes. Like only one person in on the street was the same age as me. Everybody else was at least a year older or a year younger, if not, a couple years older or younger.
Hmm.
And we all played street hockey. He's like, well, some kids are socially awkward. I'm like, I was socially awkward, so I don't know what you mean.
Right. It's like,
Like,
it's like, yeah, but you don't want to be picked last. And I was like, whatever, doesn't
I
matter.
I used to get picked last, and then slowly I climbed the ranks. I
Yeah,
wasn't
you
picked like
climb the
last
social
anymore.
ladder. It's like, nah,
Yeah, and,
I'm
well,
actually
not even
picked.
that. It's just the competence ladder, even.
Or right, but okay, yeah, that's part of the social ladder. But yeah, yeah, yeah,
Well,
that's
I
that's
just mean that there's two rankings on which people get picked for
yeah.
baseball, right?
um,
um,
but no, yeah, I was in the like I was constantly in the bottom rung of both. But someone still had to pick me eventually, and
yeah.
I still played. Like it
Well,
was just
and it's just one of those things where it's like the guy's like, well, what if someone's not able to? I'm like, you point me to someone who's not able to. Like,
yeah.
I've not seen it. I know that there's people who get like I probably didn't get the worst of it. I'm sure there's people who had more issues talking to people than I did, but I had like severe. If I didn't know someone and was nervous about talking to them, I had no volume control in the wrong direction, where I just like I couldn't make any noise. Like I would talk, and to me it sounded like I was talking at a normal volume, but nobody could hear me.
See, I
Um,
have the opposite problem.
yeah,
I
most people do.
no, actually, I don't think most people do. Most people can like kind of modulate volume. Anyways,
I just mean most people with a volume control problem go on the loud side.
oh, gotcha. Um, but no, no, no. That was actually like a big uh problem for me because I was always a big kid, both tall and wide,
Yeah.
and so I was like easy target, right, for
Mm.
bullying and stuff.
Yeah.
And my childhood friend, so I'm still friends with, like he did not get bullied as he had his own problems, but he did not get bullied as much as me. And part of the
Mm.
reason I got bullied so much is I was just loud
Mm.
and like rowdy, and like just like I would draw all the attention to me, especially with my laugh. Like when I laughed, I could be heard like 3 classrooms down the hall easy. Like I
Mm.
like if you were in the same hallway as me, no matter like how, like if it was a straight hallway, no matter how far
Yeah.
away you were, you would hear me laugh. Didn't
Fair enough.
matter. So that is the that was a problem I had, and so yeah, I was just constantly like just a focal point for like
Mm.
bullies all throughout my schooling.
Yeah, no, I didn't run into anything like that. I just often passed unnoticed. It actually like when I got my first software testing job. So this is well after all that, right?
Hmm.
I'm not consciously making no noise. But sometimes I would sit down and I'd start working, and like 30 minutes later, someone would comment on the fact that I hadn't arrived yet, turn, and then be shocked that I was there.
Hmm.
I keyed into the low impact vibe so well that sometimes I do it without noticing that I'm doing it. I don't know how much noise I've made, and so
You're low key,
people,
low key, like
yeah, unconsciously low key.
right.
Um, and yeah, so like for that, like to me that would be the worst situation for getting involved in things. Like, you know, if you're loud, at least you're now interacting with people. But if you're quiet, like, who even knows that you're there? And yet, I still played pickup game hockey with friends. Even when we moved, I made friends there, and they weren't kids that were in my classes. Um, there's just when you're outside and doing things, you run into people, and then you interact. That's
Yeah.
kind of unavoidable. And that's the real problem. So the problem isn't we have or don't have school, and we do or do not need school because of uh, like public school sports teams, which is absurd. It's that everybody's staying inside.
Hmm. Yeah,
So
this like fear of just exposing your children to other things is really bizarre to me.
yeah, it's well, and part of it is we've now overstructured everything outside of school, which gets into the thing you were talking about before. So that's seven, right? Is the idea that there's no private time. There's no time for a child to figure out who they are as a person. They are a student number and a grade.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, everyone's a number basically. Anyway,
Yeah.
we're coming up on an hour. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. But like, so what do you like? Is there anything you wanna clearly we need a third one, but is there anything closing you wanna close this one on?
Um. Why don't you go first?
Yeah. So once again, I really appreciate this book, and again, thank you for the recommendation. But the primary purpose of all governmental institutions, in my opinion, is basically to reinforce control. And I feel that schooling institutions are just another one of that. And those 7 rules that schools teach, I think, are really designed to not allow for cohesive communities outside of governmental interference. And I think that was like something I didn't really realize before reading this book. So
Yeah, I think this book has been I've been like circling some of these points. So that's definitely one of them. Is the idea of like networks versus communities.
mm-hmm.
Um, and we were trying to explain that to people in another Discord the other day, and it wasn't clicking. Um, but yeah, I think that's definitely a severe impact. And really, to me, the biggest thing, honestly, is the thing we'll probably have to go over more next time. Is the idea of like you're kind of hampering people's self actualization.
Mm-hmm.
You're taking away the joy of learning. You're taking away any time that they have to themselves, and you're creating people whose only method personal satisfaction is derived externally from being graded on something or told that they're really good at something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Anyways, as always, pleasure for the conversations, and we'll meet back here on Monday, and hopefully
Yeah.
we can have Rob and we'll keep talking about this.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.